So Eric Raddick's PhD, you're assistant professor at the University of Minnesota-Duluth, Department of American Indian Studies, and you've got a big project you're working on, or it's in the works, that involves Washburn County. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's called, tentatively, the book is titled The Murder of Joe White, Ojibwe Leadership and Colonialism in Wisconsin, and I talk about the book centers around an incident that happened right here in Washburn County, the murder of Joe White in 1894. Joe White was an Ojibwe chief whose community was in Rice Lake. And throughout the 19th century, after his father, Nana Ungabi, signed the Treaty of 1854, which created the Lekudere Reservation, there was pressure from the federal government, local governments, and in the state of Wisconsin, as far as game laws, to have them removed to Lekudere. And I talk about this incident, I talk about the treaties, I talk about the death of Nana Ungabi, the chief that signed the treaty at the hands of the Dakota down at Prairie Farm in 1855. At that point, Joe White's brother, Wabasheshi, who was the older brother, succeeded him and was the chief at Rice Lake for 22 years. And he is actually killed by another person in the community, another Ojibwe person named Bedud in 1877. And at that point, Gishkitawag, or Joe White as he was known to in logging camps and things like that, becomes the chief. He ascends the chief to be the chief, or Ogama as we say in Ojibwe language. Joe White in 1877 ascends to become the chief at Rice Lake, and there's a lot of pressure. There's the Barron County Board petitions the federal government in 1878 for the Ojibwe at Rice Lake to remove to the reservation, and at the same time the state of Wisconsin begins to assert its game laws. And back in 1854, Joe White's father, Nana Ungabi, had signed the treaty that guarantees the Ojibwe had the right to hunt, fish, and gather throughout the territory they were ceding in northern Wisconsin, northeast Minnesota, and the western part of upper Michigan. So Wisconsin ignored that, though. They ignored Ojibwe treaty rights, and they started to kind of aggressively cite tribal members for hunting off the reservation and fishing off the reservation. And these two things, as I see it, were kind of related in that they wanted the Ojibwe to remain on the reservation and not go off for any reason. So, and Joe White was a person who, even more so than his brother, who was the chief, really resisted that and really was aggressive with federal officials. And, one of the things he tells the federal government in the 1880s, the agent up at Lekudere on the reservation, he tells that it's cowardly to be kept on the reservation. And so, to my mind, this all kind of, the research that I've done, it all really accumulates in this murder, where Joe White is state game wardens. They come to arrest Joe White and they track him down. The warrant was issued in Rice Lake, and they find him up in Washburn County, just north of Long Lake, really close to the Sawyer County border. But they find him and they try to arrest him, and he's traveling with his family. The group was one adult man who, in the trial transcript, his name was Wabasha, but his name was probably Wabasheshi. There was a lot of people, like Joe White's brother had that name, and but he's the only really adult. And there's three children. There's Joe White's wife, and they're not really a threatening group per se. There was claim later that they had weapons, but there's testimony that kind of disputes that they had knives. I mean, what happened is the game wardens approach Joe White and they disarm him with his firearms, his guns, and so they set those aside, and they say, well, you want to come with us? And Joe White doesn't really speak English. He could understand some things, but the trial testimony indicates that he really didn't know anything, didn't know exactly what they were saying, so he was confused. And they go to arrest him, they put the handcuffs on him, and he steps back. And at that point, the two game wardens start beating him. And at that point, Joe White's able to kind of wiggle away, and he runs away, and they shoot him in the back, and they shoot him in the lower back. It passes through him, and he dies right there. And at that point, the game wardens, they take off, they go back to Rice Lake, they notify the authorities what happened, and they're charged with murder, and it goes to trial, and they're found not guilty of manslaughter, despite the fact there's evidence that their claim was that Joe White had a knife, and he tried to stab the game wardens. There's pretty good trial evidence that refutes that, both not only the Ojibwe eyewitnesses at the trial, but also the crime scene examiner and also the doctor that examined Joe White too, and they didn't find any kind of like defensive wounds that indicate he had a knife. So to my mind, this incident really speaks to how the history at the time and how people in northwest Wisconsin really wanted the Ojibwe on the reservation and to stay there. And at that time, Indian people were really marginal and they were really marginalized. And this incident, it's a gripping incident, but it's unique, but it's not unique given the context and how the government and citizens, where they wanted Indians to be. So that's that. That's the long explanation. So
I did the story in 2007. I remember I heard an elder from the LCO tribe says every tribe has a Joe White story.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some truth to that, isn't
Yeah,
it?
definitely. And to my mind, if you look at the story of Joe White, it's really the story of America. And, I think people have a greater familiarity with something like, the Lakota or the Sioux people and how they fought, actively, the military, the U.S. government, or like the Cherokee Trail of Tears. But, this is really our Trail of Tears in northwest Wisconsin. And I say our, not just a native person, as everybody that lives here. And this is our kind of shared history. And it's not maybe as centralized or as institutionalized as those, like the Cherokee experience or the Lakota experience, but it accomplished the same thing. It was getting Indians on the reservation and, taking over Indian land. So,
well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.